In this video, I will be giving an overview of the parts and functions of the Bernina machine. Just know that while I will go over the most basic parts, there are many things that the Bernina machine can do that I won't necessarily touch on in this video, as this is just an introduction to the machine. Starting on the right hand side, we have the hand wheel. The hand wheel is only ever to be turned towards yourself, and it could technically manually operate your machine, but we don't use it for that. It does rotate when you push the foot pedal down, so that's one way that you know your machine is functioning, and it's one way that you can manually move the needle and the take-up lever up and down. Moving from right to left, we have behind the hand wheel is the spool pin, and on the top next to the spool pin towards the front, we have the bobbin winder and the bobbin winder switch. There's also a small knife on the switch that allows you to cut the bobbin thread. On the face of the machine, just above the Bernina brand name, we have 10 numbers, and then a number sign and a clear button. This is responsible for your different types of stitches. The Bernina machine is capable of doing quite a few different stitches actually, and while numbers 1 through 0 are listed on the face, you can also press the number button and then enter in a number higher than 9, and your machine manual has a list of all the stitches that your machine can do. Above the number plate, you can see there are some buttons that we're not going to worry about in this class. Just leave those alone, and we won't worry about messing with those in this course. Just to the left of those buttons, you can see 3 pairs with a small picture in between. At the top, you have the zigzag buttons, otherwise known as the stitch width adjusters. So if you turn on your machine and you see a number 1 on the screen and it's all set in the regular straight stitch form, you could still adjust your stitch width to be wider and your machine would perform a zigzag stitch. Sitting at 0, it means there is no width to your stitches, so your machine will sew in a straight line. The second pair of buttons in the middle are your needle placement, so you can move your needle to the left or to the right. We typically sew with it in the center, but there are times, especially when you're sewing a zipper, that you'll want to move your needle to the left or the right. The bottom pair of buttons is the stitch length adjuster. On the Juki, it's a knob, and on the Berninas, it's an electrical adjustment. So you push the up arrows to lengthen your stitch length, and you push the arrows down to lessen the stitch length. You can see all of the settings that you have on the screen, and you will notice that there are blinking bars both on the horizontal and the vertical line. Those indicate the standard setting for the stitch that you've chosen. So for number 1 selected, the standard settings are a 2.5 stitch length and a 0 stitch width. If you select a different stitch, say number 2, 3, 4, or 5, those settings and where the blinking bar is would change based on that. Moving on over to your screen, one of the buttons that we'll point out is below the screen. There's a picture of the tip of a needle with an up and down arrow. This simply adjusts your needle position, so if your needle is up and you push that button, your needle will move down. You also have the backstitch button, which looks like a U with an arrow on the end. You push and hold that button when you want your machine to backstitch, and you release it when you're ready to go forward again. The bar in the front is simply a protection in front of the take-up lever, and it also functions as a little bit of tension holding the thread at the bottom. The take-up lever is hidden back behind that shiny steel bar, and that lifts your thread up and down. Moving downwards towards the needle, you have on the Bernina machine a needle threading mechanism. I haven't ever used one. I always thread my needle by hand. Doesn't mean you can't use them, but in my opinion, it's a little bit more complicated to figure that out and to put the thread where it needs to go in that little mechanism rather than just threading your own needle. So we have the shaft of the presser foot and then the presser foot itself. The presser foot applies pressure to the fabric and essentially squishes the fabric between itself and the feed dogs in order to give enough pressure for the fabric to move. Your machine will move the fabric at the pace that's appropriate, so unless you're doing something very specific, you shouldn't be pulling or pushing your fabric through faster than your machine moves it. You can see your feed dogs down on the stitch plate, and you also have lines on your stitch plate that will help you sew straight and with the correct seam allowance. We'll open up the machine, and you can see the inside of the machine. There's not much that you really need to worry about inside, except to know that your bobbin case clicks inside threaded, and you need that lower thread in order to sew. Those are the basic parts and functions of the Bernina machine. There are, like I said, other things that it can do and other buttons and functions that it can perform, but for our purposes, I've gone over the most important ones.